Great. We have about 90 participants registered, so we will still wait a little bit more. Just to note that the webinar will also be streamed via Facebook Live, and it is also being recorded and will be available also on our YouTube page. Okay, I see we also have participants joining from Belgium, Georgia, Bulgaria, Denmark, Tunisia. Okay, sunny Brussels and Italy. Yes, so all the participants, we will do quickly a round of introductions. So we can start. Welcome on behalf of the partnership between the European Commission and the Council of Europe in the field of youth. This is our first webinar as a part of Perspectives on Youth series, which is covering different topics of importance to young people. And within the series, we will be covering topics related to environment, political participation of young people, digitalization, social inclusion, solidarity, as well as issues that are coming up. So basically all the participants of the webinar, unlike in the meetings, are muted. So please use the chat function to leave your comments, your questions, as well as anything else you would like to raise regarding this topic and the webinar. You all had the opportunity probably to read the article from Kevin. This is now quite a new and very important topic regarding the current health pandemic. And we will be exploring today with Kevin the impact of the pandemic on the environmental movement, on the economy, and on inequalities, and particularly on how the youth sector is responding to the current situation. Kevin has been involved with our work before as well at the last year's symposium on political participation of young people. He's a Barcelona-based artivist, and he's the director of the Artivist Network. I very much look forward to his presentation, and I hope that you all also enjoyed the article that he wrote, which was published last week. And I would like to now give the word to Kevin. We will be starting the presentation first. You can leave your questions either in the chat or in the Facebook comments, and we will be following up with questions after the presentation. So, Kevin, the floor is yours.
Hello, and welcome to everybody. It's been really inspiring to see all of these different welcomes of different people from so many different countries, contexts, and cultures tuning in today. So thank you, all of you, for taking the time to join us here, and hopefully we'll have something interesting to share. I'm going to be presenting for about the next 35 minutes, and then really any questions that come up, put them into the chat, because there's such a diversity of participation here that we really want to open up some space to get other questions and comments coming in. So let's try to make this participatory as possible. Also, just a special thanks for inviting me to participate in this webinar. It's been a really useful experience for me, at least personally, to have a space to pull together some of my thoughts about this and to bring forth some of the amazing ideas that are being shared by other thinkers and organizers around the world. Just as a quick piece of background of myself, my name is Kevin Buckland, part of the Artivist Network, artivistnetwork.org. and I've spent the past 15 years as a climate activist. Almost all of that was in the very young youth climate movement, just sort of as it was developing into a globalized movement. And so really feel like my cultural organizing home is with the youth movement, even though I now have a youth of my own. So, as Lana mentioned, I'm based in Barcelona, and I'll be talking a little bit about the specific organizing that's happening here in my neighborhood, in my city, because here in Spain, we've been dealing with the crisis for a bit longer. We were in the unique situations where we could see how Italy was responding, and then to learn a bit from that and then try things out here. So hopefully that can be useful to everyone else as we organize and grapple with what is our role at this very, very historic and unique time. So just bear with me for a second. We can start the presentation, but I have to share my screen first. 1 second. Okay, so cool. So I've tried to do it like this so you can sort of see me as well. Hi, while you see the slides. Thought that might be a bit more dynamic than a traditional slideshow. So welcome. We're all in the same ship. The context of a crisis matters. So I wanted to start with this image of the Diamond Princess, this cruise ship that, as many of you may have known already, was one of the first places where massive contagion of the COVID-19 virus happened on this cruise ship that was then quarantined off of Japan. And I wanted to start with this image because I feel like in many ways this is a useful and apt metaphor for the situation we find ourselves in as a planet. This is a contained vessel. There's no way off. We can't get off this planet. The people that are on board with us, and we're all in this together in some ways. But just like the Diamond Princess ship, there are some inequalities that are already existing. We're not all in an equal situation. And while a virus such as the COVID-19 needs a host such as ourselves to flourish, we also are hosted by the context, community, and society in which we live. So we really need to understand that viruses are not purely natural things that are emerging into a natural environment, but actually they're emerging into the constructed human environment. And how we've constructed that environment matters, and how we have constructed that environment will affect who suffers and who doesn't from this crisis. So to continue with the Diamond Princess, in case you've never had the chance to be there, they've got wonderful things like these onboard jacuzzis where you can sit and look. They have award-winning pizza, being served and tossed fresh in front of you. But while this ship, like the world around us, has a lot of really cool luxury stuff, suddenly when everyone on the ship starts coughing, getting sick, and people's health is at risk, suddenly all of that luxury might seem a lot less important. So we're actually in this interesting moment where I think priorities are in many ways sort of being redefined and readdressed. And part of this thinking is a reflection on what was normal before this crisis started. I think almost everyone on this call, I'm assuming, is in some state of a changed society. The patterns of daily life have been ruptured in some ways. Here we are in, I think going into week 4 of quarantine here. So my life has definitely been changed. The rhythm of life has changed. And whenever there's a break in the pattern of normalcy, it is also a simultaneously space where other things that weren't previously possible can come through. But before we look at what actually might be coming up, we should look at some of the context of what normal was. And again, remembering back to the Diamond Princess metaphor, is there's limited fuel. That ship is powered by fossil fuels, and that's a finite resource that has to keep coming in. There's limited water on the ship. There's limited resources, limited food. There's limited toilet paper, which people might suddenly start freaking out about kind of randomly. But this is all part of the context and how that matters. Because on the ship also, there's not just passengers, but there's also the workers on the ship, many of which who have 6-month contracts, which are really badly paid and involving working about 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 6 months nonstop. Those people that are working on the ship, they're not the ones drinking the champagne, they're the ones washing the glasses. And as such, they are actually very often in a higher risk scenario than many of the people doing other more consumption, we shall say. And also the workers on the ship, on the Diamond Princess, they slept, many of them, together in bunks below deck. They did not have these luxurious suites that many of the guests had. So we need to think also about, as we look at this crisis, is how has culturally, historically accumulated privilege been making some people able to fare better than others? And what can we be doing as organizers to make sure that as we address this current crisis, we're not just exacerbating and making worse these inequalities, but we're actually organizing in ways that can start to address them. So what is normal? And then, so from crisis to crises, let's remember that COVID-19 is not the only crisis the world is facing. Indeed, it's not even the only pandemic, but the HIV/AIDS pandemic and tuberculosis are still ravaging the world and killing thousands and thousands of people every year. And yet, we're not having the same response to that, when theoretically we could be. All of the changes we're seeing could actually be happening around other crises, including the climate crisis. So these are the only graphs I'm going to show, I promise. From there on, the images will be a bit more interesting. So this is this is COVID. Maybe you've been looking at charts similar to this, but I wanted to show this because this chart this is the total coronavirus cases going up really at a scary speed. But I think it's important to look at this chart at the same time that we're looking at some of the extinction charts. These are cumulative extinctions of different types of species, and they're shooting up really fast. And likewise, annual CO2 emissions are going up on this same growth trajectory that we're seeing. So I think if we're looking at this exponential growth of problems, I think we actually need to be seeing if there's a pattern in that, between viruses extinction and atmospheric contamination are all going up so drastically. We might be able to infer that it's actually connected to something larger than just one pandemic. It's actually part of the way that globalization in the world has been structured, with this hyper-connected, hyper-sped, fossil-fueled, jet-fueled, jet-setting world that we live in now. So this is part of what is normal. It's normal that we're undergoing the 6th great mass extinction event that's been going on. We're losing countless species every year. It's normal that we are headed towards a climate catastrophe and that nothing is being done to slow emissions that are going to make life much less inhabitable, specifically for the world's poor, and already is having great impacts. This is what's normal. And I think when a crisis like this cracks open the pattern of normality, we have to be remembering is our goal to be going back to the normal that we had already, or are we actually looking ahead to coming out of this crisis and into a different space, which is, I think, the question that youth must be grappling with. Is the future post-COVID-19 going to be the same as the future seemed before? Okay, here we go. And as many of you have probably seen this graph as well, the idea of flatten the curve. What we have to do is slow this arc so that we can actually have these problems coming on in a scale that we can actually be dealing with them. So a question would be like, if we're working so hard to flatten the curve of COVID-19, should we not also be working so hard to flatten the curve of HIV/AIDS tuberculosis, the global climate emergency, and the sixth great extinction. And what is normal? Let's remember that 2019 was a pretty special year in terms of public organizing, mobilizing, and uprisings. 2019 saw major uprisings all across the world in Sudan, Colombia, Iran, Haiti, Lebanon, Bolivia, Chile, France, Catalonia, Algeria, Iraq, Hong Kong, India, and more. All of these countries, and perhaps a few more, had quite major disruptions where people were taking to the streets in mass, protesting, in many cases, the government. And what we're seeing is this lack of a social contract. People all over the world are disenchanted with the governments. They're disenchanted with how their policies are playing out. And I think this is very normal. We are towards the end of a really strong push towards privatization and other neoliberal economic policies that have seen the growth of wealth inequality in unprecedented ways, where very few are making a huge amount of money while thousands and thousands are suffering. And so you get these moments such as in Chile, where a 4% metro fare raise can trigger mass civil unrest, or in Lebanon, where a small charge on WhatsApp calls can kick this off, can be a detonator. So let's remember that the normal we were coming out of wasn't super happy all over anyway. And we also saw, this is here in Barcelona, the amazing Fridays for Future group, the youth climate strikers. And we've also saw a year in 2019 of unprecedented climate mobilizations, organizing, and strikes, precisely on what we need to be confronting this kind of crisis. So people have really been waking up to how serious this is, and especially youth have been realizing that this is going to drastically affect every piece of our future moving ahead. The scale and depth of the climate catastrophe cannot be underestimated in any way. And so many of the existing inequalities in society will be exacerbated, again, made worse by the climate crisis. So let's be thinking about how we can be thinking from crisis to crises, how we can be thinking of the global health crisis and the global climate crisis as coming from having much of the same root and perhaps some of the same causes that our organizing might be able to address. So let's think always, as we're organizing in this context of COVID, how are we preparing ourselves to be better tackling some of these other problems that were existing, so we don't have to go back to a normal that wasn't so great for everybody. Also, let's remember the economy wasn't doing that great either. If you've never heard of the carbon bubble, it's a really important concept. Basically, what happens is whenever fossil fuels are discovered, they are, even if they're still underground, they count, ExxonMobil finds new gas reserves somewhere. They treat it as if they're assuming it will be burned. So the result is there's actually a lot more fossil fuels discovered than can be safely burned. And all of these ones that have been discovered are already in the economy. So what we see is about 80% of the global fossil fuel economy actually needs to be kept underground and needs to not be given economic value. So there's this huge economic bubble that is the biggest economic bubble ever in history that is in our system and is continuing to growing as fossil fuel companies continue to look for more fossil fuels. Yeah, so economy wasn't that great anyway. And we have to remember normal meant a lot of different things to a lot of different people. This is Top Manta, a collective here in Barcelona that makes clothing and as a way to organize with street vendors, many of whom are new immigrants to Europe, and many of whom are escaping the impacts of climate change that make it harder to leave agricultural lifestyles, escaping the same poverty that's been imposed by these extractivist neoliberal policies. So they're coming somewhere looking for a better life. And all around the world, we're seeing an extraction of people's health and people's resources for the betterment of a few. So we need to be thinking that, remembering that this doesn't affect everybody, and especially a COVID crisis that was in many ways caused by people flying around the world, whereas the vast majority of people have never even been in an airplane, but yet they might be dealing with some of the effects of this high-speed globalization. So in this photo here is one of these collective members from Top Manta making masks. So this was one of the first collectives here in Barcelona that jumped in and said, look, we need to be protecting people. And they turned from making clothes to making masks, and already they started bringing food to the most vulnerable communities. Many street vendors, if they can't be on the street selling, they don't have any income. Let's start also thinking about what solidarity means in a context where many people can't quarantine, they can't stay home for a number of reasons. And if they can, that means not having income, not having food, or any of these things. And let's just think, this is how it's been playing out in our city. But in the coming months, we are going to see how COVID affects global south all over the world. Already in Ecuador and India and other places, we're seeing what this might look like in countries that have had their economies weakened by centuries of exploitation and colonialism, and maybe are less prepared to deal with something like this. So it's time to rethink solidarity. Okay, so what we're learning, I think all of us have changed so much since this crisis started, and we can think about what a month ago, I mean, my sister said something I thought was notable of, if a month ago you had told someone that all sports around the world would be stopped, you think it would be impossible. And suddenly we're seeing all of these things that never would have been possible before are suddenly happening almost overnight. And this is really causing us and should cause us to question a lot of the norms of that we've been told about society and what these things mean. So here's a few reflections of what we've been learning. And I wanted to start with this image. Don't worry, the tiger's not about to eat that kid. There's a big piece of glass there. But there's another image mentioned in the article that I wrote in preparation for this. I think for many of us, we're confronting life and the reality of life and a closeness with death in many ways that modernity has protected many of us from. At least I personally feel that way. And then suddenly here comes in, swiping something new out of nowhere, comes really quickly. And it's very different when you're looking at a tiger behind that glass, or if that glass was not there and suddenly this is coming into your world. So I think one of the main mental changes I think the world has been undergoing is we are no longer, we've broken this myth that humans are separate from nature, that nature can be controlled by humans, and that nature is this ordered process that we can be, intervening with as we like. We've learned that humans are intricately connected with nature. This virus has come through our brushing up against other species. That crossing over has shown just how interconnected we actually are with other species. Also, the interconnection of how fast this is spread. This has shown we are a truly globalized world. If something like this can spread all over the world so quickly, what else is spreading? What else? Which other ways are we interconnected? Not just to other humans, but also to the other ecosystems and structures, transport structures, economic structures, food structures that we've been seeing. We're suddenly becoming conscious of scarcity, of the supermarkets here, at least, that some things are starting to run low. We're not sure how that's going to play out. In the south of Spain, they're missing thousands of pickers to be picking the food that people that normally come up from Morocco are not coming this year. So there's a question of potential food shortages coming. So suddenly this human bubble protection is changing a bit. And I want to show this image too, because I think it's very, very cute. But also we're showing how that rubbing up against nature, how nature can have a huge impact on our society. When I say society, our economy, that is in many ways a collective belief. It's based upon our collective belief that the economy is going to keep growing, and sort of a barometer of our hopes and fears of the future. Well, suddenly, random chain of events has led us to maybe be less secure about that. Another thing we've seen changing is that we've been told so much for so long that things are not politically possible. With climate change, this is the COP25 UN Climate Summit. We've been told over and over again that look, you can't expect too much. We can't actually deal with this crisis. It's not politically possible. And what we've seen is overnight governments changing policies, diverting resources, coming together, reacting, closing borders, opening hospitals. In Spain here, they've completely taken over the private hospital sector for the public good. All of these things which in moments of crisis like this, when the pattern is broken, suddenly new things become possible, both for good and bad. Many of the massive corporate bailouts we've seen that are saving industries such as the airlines, cruise ships, and fossil fuel industries. These bailouts are also one of the side effects of a shock such as this. But we need to be thinking about how this rupture of normality can actually help us to go ahead to a new normal. And this photo I wanted to show because this is actually the same place where the UN Climate Conference was in Madrid, just in December, and it has now been turned into hospital beds. So we can see this really fast and amazing, showing the power of human ingenuity, jumping ahead. Another thing we've been seeing is this is a group Zoom call that happened last week here in Spain. And these are all different people from the maker community. These different groups, and they were getting together to talk and share experience about how they've all been 3D printing respirators and masks and what they can be learning from each other. So we're also seeing this international production collaboration of open source skills that people are sharing openly, updating patterns. A really inspiring way to actually be rethinking what is possible with modern production and modern communication. How open sourcing information, collaborating instead of competition, it could be radically affecting the way in which human development comes. And again, a question is, if we can be doing this now, why is it that we're not doing this also with solar panels, wind turbines, insulation, HIV, AIDS treatments, and all of these things that are affecting the other crises we're also dealing with today. Here is a beer company that started making hand sanitizer. Like so many people, and there's I really believe in the goodwill of humans, that inside we want to do good. We're a collaborative species. Darwin mentioned cooperation much more than he mentioned competition. So I think we really want the best of us to be invited forward, to be participating in, and all around me, I'm seeing people trying to help. So I think that this push towards collaboration hopefully can be something that outlives this crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, and can help us better deal with other problems we're facing. Here is a car manufacturer, SEAT, here in Barcelona, that within a week prototyped 13 different types of respirators and went from producing cars to which are, a private mode of transport based upon the consumption of fossil fuels, towards producing respirators, which are a public good that are actually saving lives, helping people breathe, instead of cars, which are actually hurting, stopping people from breathing. What we've also seen is a reminder about what is actually really important in life, what roles of society are important. In Italy and Spain and other countries now, we have seen governments cease all activity that was deemed non-essential. And that has really stripped down the economy to its core and actually shown us, I think, that what is really important here is, and who are the heroes of society. The heroes today are the nurses and doctors, like the ones in these photos that are holding up a banner that says, "Stay at home." Other heroes are the people working in supermarkets that are distributing stuff. Other heroes are the people that are caring for the elderly right now. But what we're actually seeing is what is essential in our society is the reproductive work, the people that help us to maintain this society to keep going, rather than the productive work of building new buildings, selling new shoes, all of these things. So hopefully this is actually a space for us to be, recontemplating what work is actually essential in our society. And many of this important care work tends to be done by both immigrants and by women. And much of the care work in our society is actually very low carbon. This is actually a sector that we should be pushing as many people into as possible, because it improves quality of life without increasing emissions. And also we should remember that many of these jobs are increasingly poorly paid. And many of these jobs, especially the health sector here in Spain, since the 2008 financial crisis, has dealt with huge cuts to the public healthcare sector, which now we are seeing come back at us. So hopefully we can be coming out of this crisis with a new appreciation for these low carbon sectors of public and private functioning of society. Another thing we've learned from this crisis is how fast we can bring down pollution levels. These are two photos from NASA's satellite images that show contamination, air pollution before and after the cities and factories closed down in China. We're seeing the same thing here in Barcelona. The skies are clear, the air tastes different. And across Italy as well, dangerous air contamination is going down. So suddenly all this thing of this is impossible, we're locked into an inertia of economics, it's not politically possible, all of these things have just been overturned. And I hope that society has realized how quick change is possible and how quick many of us adapt to it, and how we can get by okay without the economy going at full steam ahead. We can get by okay without everyone driving around in their private vehicles to get to work. So yeah, what other learnings? I think another learning is, and I chose this image for two reasons. One, because so much of these images around toilet paper have been going viral, which I think we must remember also, we live in a society where communication is itself viral. We probably have all talked about viral videos or even computer viruses, but how the digitalization of this speed came in many ways before the actual virus that we're now dealing with. But we have constructed a society that functions like this, that is so interconnected, it's so interwoven and so fast that things like this can spread quickly. And I also wanted to share this because I found the whole toilet paper phenomenon, which if you didn't know about it, in many countries, it's sort of like people were really freaking out that they were going to run out of toilet paper, and like were buying all of it and hoarding it, and people were fighting. And in many ways, it was, this symbol of humans trying to save their own ass, basically. And this individualist logic of hoarding and I'm going to be okay on my own. But I think, what we can also see from this is how much more complicated and how connected our societies are when we're suddenly realizing that our health is intricately tied to the health of our neighbors around us, that we want them to be healthy for us to be healthy. And I think that learning hopefully can bring forward to start to understand how our cities can be healthier and how we can be building healthier societies. And this is my favorite time of day. This is a photo from our rooftop I took yesterday, and you can see all of the people on their balconies clapping. And we come out every day at 8 p.m. to clap. It began as applause for the healthcare workers that are saving lives right now. But now it's become about applauding everyone who's doing the important work of keeping society functioning, keeping people safe, including applause for everyone who's been staying at home. So if you're at home in quarantine, thank you. You're doing an important role of society right now. And I think, and I want to show this image because I think we must also remember that in society, we are all needed. We all play important roles. This is a collectively created world we live in, and we all have a role to play. And let's not think that once we don't have to stay home anymore, our role is over, but instead that this has been a door opening into the interconnectedness of our communities and our role in it. Also, another thing we've learned is this is an Amazon.com warehouse, and Amazon has redirected some of their orders because they were getting flooded with orders, and they've started prioritizing essential goods, hand sanitizer, medical supplies, medicines, foods, over some of the other things, such as your electric crepe maker, which might be taking a week longer than expected, or that great dinosaur costume I really wanted to order but couldn't. But I wanted to show this image as we start talking about what solidarity means to here, is because anything we do now in response to the COVID-19 crisis, we must ask the question of why did we not do this before? And will we do this afterwards? If there are people dying all over the world for lack of clean water, and we have a system created that can send things around the planet overnight, should we not have already been prioritizing getting the basic health needs to those people instead of getting that crepe maker to me? So let's move ahead. And this image I wanted to show because it says some of this is, here's a tip. You should wash your hands even when there isn't a global virus pandemic. A lot of what we're seeing now is stuff that should be happening anyway. From a climate perspective, we should be taking all these cars off the road anyway. We should be slowing down the construction economies. We should be slowing down the amount of flights that are happening. But also a lot of the solidarity work of should we not be making sure that everyone's getting food that they need all the time? Should we not be making sure that healthcare workers have what they need and the respect that they need? Should we not make sure that important reproductive work and care work is well paid so that people can be doing it to the best of their ability, and not, as in the United States, many people working in elderly care had to have multiple jobs because they weren't paid enough. And that was one of the biggest sources of transmission of the disease that we saw. So there's a fantastic book I would really recommend to everybody by Rebecca Solnit called A Paradise Built in Hell: The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster. And this looks at 5 different crises that have happened in history and how communities responded. And the conclusion was people respond really well. People spend days digging strangers out of rubble after an earthquake, after massive fires. They set up kitchens in parks where everything is free for everybody. So there's this great quote of, it's tempting to ask why, if you fed your neighbors during the time of the earthquake and fire, you didn't do so before or after. And I think this right there, that's the crucial question we must be dealing with right now, is what are we doing right now? Why didn't we do it before? And will we keep doing it afterwards? And a great example of international solidarity, because we must remember that as countries close borders to try to deal with this, the response must be global. This is a global pandemic. Countries need to be sharing information, resources, materials, money with each other so we can be saving as many lives as possible, regardless of what passport those people have. And here are some doctors arriving in Cuba, Cuban doctors arriving in Italy as volunteers to help deal with this COVID crisis. And this is a great example of the kind of internationalist spirit that was so prevalent in the world 100 years ago and 80 years ago today. And maybe this is where we need to see some of the rebirthing of that, of this in this globalized culture. What does solidarity look like? Here in Spain, this is a few weeks ago, but this is a map of mutual aid groups that have sprung up and are putting themselves online for people to contact them. This is a map of my neighborhood. I live kind of over here somewhere. And this is, you know, the neighborhood's divided up into different zones. Each zone has its own Telegram group. It's kind of like WhatsApp, but not owned by Facebook, that they're communicating. And inside each group, we are trying to make sure that we're all checking up on a few different streets, making sure people are okay. So this is a great decentralized, and I think also in crises, we see crises such as this, it's too big a problem for any centralized structure to respond to, though some governments are doing amazing work, but it's also up to us to have grassroots, bottom-up, self-organizing. We're the ones who know our communities best. We're the ones who know where the elderly people live and who the at-risk people are on our street, and we're the ones that can be checking up with them. People are sharing their wireless to make sure that children that are being homeschooled can do their homework. People are, you know, doing support networks. These are people offering to go help and buy your food or medicines and bring them to you at home. And I wanted to really highlight something here. It's in Catalan, but it says, we are a group of young people, healthy and self-organized, who want to help people in risk and the elderly in front, facing the exceptional situation we're in. And I wanted to highlight this specifically because as we think about the role of youth, we must remember this virus, youth are particularly low risk in terms of cases, and thus might actually be able to take slightly bigger risks in terms of going out onto the streets and helping people, definitely taking all the precautions possible so that you yourself don't become infected and take capacity away from the medical system that's already strained, and that you don't pass it to other people. But maybe this is a space where youth can immediately be stepping up and saying, this is a moment where the youth, we need to be helping our elders. We need to be stepping up and taking advantage of that privilege of having lower risk and using that fully. People are offering, collecting food and distributing it to at-risk people. There is a rent strike movement happening all across Spain of people saying, look, housing's a right. If I don't have a job, I don't have to pay my rent. And this is really getting big. There's also this thing called like the social shock. People talk about economic shocks at moments such as this. But there's a campaign here in Spain called the Plan de Choc Social, the social shock plan, which is trying to take advantage of this unique moment to put in some of the social protections that people need anyway. So instead of 6 months without evictions, it's why don't we have an indefinite suspension of all housing evictions for people that don't have anywhere else to live. Instead of a 50% pause on rents, why don't we have all of these empty apartment buildings here in Spain and across Southern Europe that are owned by banks and investment funds that are empty? Why don't we take those back and have people living in them? And also, instead of giving credits to vulnerable families, should vulnerable families really be the ones having to pay high rents, or should we have a minimum wage, a living wage that everyone has to make sure that their basic necessities are taken care of? And we're seeing all sorts of other stranger things happen. This was yesterday. There in Second Life, online world, there was a mass direct action where people were blocking an airport in there. So we're seeing a lot of different ways people can respond as we try to organize in this context of no return to normal. We need to flatten the curve while we're flattening emissions, and think also about what are the other social injustices we're going to be dealing with. So this, here's a graffiti from Hong Kong that appeared recently, and it says basically the same as this. We won't return to normality because normality itself was the problem. And on a final note, I wanted to invite all of you because today is the International Day of Health. So here across Spain and in Barcelona, people will be hanging white sheets and banners from their balconies, from their windows, to say, that public healthcare can't be sold; it must be protected. And in closing, let's remember that we're not just in quarantine; we are organizing, and that youth have a especially important role to play because they have a world to win. The future is yet to be written. We are seeing a unique opportunity that might only come once in a generation to make radical changes that might lock us into further inequality or might address some of the already existing crises that have been going on already. So I would really encourage everyone to not to think beyond how we can go back to normal, but actually imagine what is the world you want, what do we need so we can get there, and remember that it's the role of youth to be demanding the impossible. Don't let reality hold back your thoughts, because we know there's so much more that we can be doing, and that our health depends on the health of all of those around us. So we're incredibly interconnected. And also we must politically be keeping an eye to make sure that any political decisions are also climate compatible, are also in agreement with the Paris Agreement. Otherwise, by dealing with one crisis, we're creating another crisis. And that this is also a potential moment, as all of these jobs are stopped, is a great time to be reevaluating what jobs are necessary, what jobs are causing the climate crisis, and what jobs are dealing with it, and how can we be using this moment to create a just transition for workers and the economy and the climate, so that the youth have a better world to live in, where there are safe, clean jobs for everyone, and that we're not doing work that then our children will have to undo. So thank you very much. This is our website, theartivistnetwork.org, and you can follow me on Twitter at Change of Art. And thank you very much. We went 8 minutes over, but we started a little bit late, but we still have a bit of time for questions. Cool, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Kevin, for raising very important questions about what normality is, and also what are some of the ways in which different groups around the world can actually organize and help each other in the situation. We received quite a number of questions, and some of them are also related with the ones about the youth movement. So I would like to start with those, perhaps focusing on what is the role now of youth movements, considering the current situation, in actually making sure that young people are involved in developing this next phase, in actually participating in making decisions that are going to be important, both in terms of the environment. Yes, we are seeing now the decrease in pollution levels and also some improvements, but we also have to think about the other effects that the crisis is having on the lives of people around the world. And in relation to that, then what are the next steps for young people and youth movements, both organized young people, but also those who are less organized or going through the youth movements, and if there are any initiatives that you know of that are already taking place in that regard. Linked with that was also the question, so I'll just group them together. Because the youth, there was a question that we received by email already yesterday regarding whether young people today should be organizing globally together around a common message, or if it's more impactful to actually have different messages at different fronts. Yeah, would you like to start with those and then we go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks. Those are really good questions. Cool. So I'll try to deal with this a bit, and would really encourage everyone to be capturing these questions and asking your friends about them as well. Talking to other people about this. I think there's so much we can talk about, and it's one of these rare moments when we have time to talk about things with people. So how can youth be playing a role to make sure that they're involved in the making of these decisions? My immediate answer would be to build power. Use this moment to build power. What we've seen in my neighborhood is suddenly there are 123 people in our Telegram group who I wasn't connected to with before, but I am connected to now. And that this is maybe a not particularly politicized community, but it's people on the margins that want to be doing something good. So actually thinking about how organizing against this crisis gets new people involved with social organizing in these collective organizing processes, so that you can build power in ways to create pressure. I think also a bit relating to the next steps questions, let's remember that let's try to plan ahead. There's going to be a slow rollout. I mean, here in Spain, they're starting to talk about it in a few weeks. Maybe we'll be allowed to start going to the parks again, or people will be allowed to go out, once a week or whatnot. So we're actually going to see a gradually changing situation and try to imagine what kind of public participation is possible at each of these different situations, keeping risk always to its complete minimum. And on a concrete next step, I would really encourage everyone to check out the platform By 2020 We Rise Up. I think it's by 2020 we rise up.net. That is a organizing platform around Europe where different people and different groups are getting together to organize around climate in 2020. And a bit of this question around common strategy or common message or separate, in my opinion, and why I work as a climate justice organizer, is we need to be finding intersectional spaces of organizing where multiple issues and movements intersect and collide, because it's these spaces where we are suddenly reaching beyond the pro-animal folks, or beyond the people that are really worried about plastics, or beyond the people that are for organic agriculture. If we can find these spaces of intersection, that's where we start seeing coherent worlds being communicated with more and more power, more and more people involved, and people that can be involved, I guess. Cool. I don't know if that answered the questions well enough, but maybe if there's a few more questions.
Yeah, there was also another one linked to the youth movement, so I'll try to group the questions. And one was related with your youth movement, which you were involved in, which you started 15 years ago. And the question is about the difference between youth movements then and now. But I imagine the youth movements in 2019 and right now also differ quite a lot in terms of the activities. So maybe just a bit of a reflection in terms of how has it changed? Has young people's participation become more accepted by the wider society, and how are young people organizing differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the biggest change we've seen, especially in climate organizing, is the tone. When I started organizing, we said we're going to stop this crisis, and I think now we've realized we are in this crisis. The world is collapsing around us, and we are not going to escape this at all. It's already happening. And the question now is this going to be a crisis or a catastrophe? And will human civilization be able to come out of this with some semblance of civilization? So that's not going well. But from the organizing perspective, I mean, look at 2019. There was an explosion of youth. The biggest youth, probably the biggest youth movement in history, has just happened right before this. So there's all these local Fridays for Future groups, all these local youth climate strikers, all these groups, all of these networks. And youth are such important organizers because youth and students, they call them, one way is like internal detonators. They are all embedded in different structures. They are all on soccer teams, football teams, sorry, I'm American. They are all involved in families, involved in different schools. They are incredibly connected to diverse sectors of society. So this is one of the things I think as people get older, they start, like interaction, they start being more with people that think like them, perhaps. Whereas as youth, you're constantly put together with a wide range of people that you can be talking to and organizing with. And so I think the severity, also the means of communication. Like we barely had the internet when I started getting involved with this. And like we certainly didn't have WhatsApp groups or Telegram groups or any of this stuff. And I think that's really inspiring as a way to specifically harness momentum and keep it moving. Is now we're building like just the Telegram group here from our neighborhood. That's a tool that we have, a network that we can move forward with. And I think also a big change is because of the severity of this is youth are saying this is not acceptable. It is not okay to be sacrificing my future so that fossil fuel executives can become richer. It's not acceptable to be sacrificing my right to a happy, healthy life so that as a sacrifice to making sure this myth of economic growth keeps up.
Thank you, Kevin. Related to that, we also had some questions which link with the economic situation as well. We have seen the impact the crisis has had on the environment, but then also we have to be aware of the fact that yes, many people have lost their jobs, and there is quite a strong economic impact on the lives and well-being and livelihoods of many people. So the question relates with also the tourism industry. Well, the question is posed in Barcelona specifically, but also I think many places around the world are seeing quite a big impact of the loss of income from tourism, and then also loss of income from other economic activities. And if we are thinking about the climate and environment, and then what is the new normal that we will be going back to coming from this, then what are the alternatives that we can be looking into to make sure that yes, the environment is still taken care of, and but that also people are taken care of in terms of their economic well-being.
Thank you. Yeah, and a really important question, especially talking with so many of my friends around the world, and where the vast majority of the population is this question of who has the privilege to sort of enjoy their quarantine and who doesn't. So many people who have seen their income totally stopped, but their rent is not stopping, which is I think why we're seeing some of these organizing things like the rent strike here in Spain is really a response to people's basic needs. And this question of livelihoods, I think we're in a kind of a strange moment in history, and I think youth need to remember this all the time, is that there's so much work that needs to be done. Really, like we have to transform our entire base of our global economy, which is based upon fossil fuels. We have to change all of that in the next like eight or 9 years if we're going to avert a collapse of the basic life systems that support life on Earth. So there's so much work that needs to be done, but let's think about how can we be redirecting work towards what is most important, knowing that at this moment is the airline industry something that is responsible for so much greenhouse gas emissions that benefits a very small portion of the population that fly regularly. Is that the priority? Is that who should we be bailing out? Or is now a moment to have a massive investment in health education so that in 8 years' time, when the next crisis comes, we have an entire youth that have been well brought up with free public health education so that we have amazing doctors and facilities set up. I think we need to be thinking a bit longer term. And specifically the question around tourism this is a really like relevant issue to me is because during the one of the previous sort of global pandemics that didn't get to this, the H1N1 scare, a really dear friend was living in Cancun, Mexico, and his parents were working in hotels. And this is a region that the entire economy depends on tourism. And because they thought that this disease had originated in Mexico, all tourism overnight shut down. And actually what we saw is how so many of these sectors, tourism, for example, are making our economies incredibly fragile because they're the first thing that goes. And now the 2 hotels that overlook my roof, they're empty. And actually thinking, do we want to be building economic bodies that are that fragile that they can't handle something about like this? Or can we be actually thinking about that how, as we relocalize our economies, we're actually building ourselves to be shock resistant? Because let's remember, this is not the only shock that's coming. Here we had a massive storm hit here a few months ago. There's wildfires, all, you know, the wildfires from Australia aren't that far away. The climatic impacts that are coming and will be intensifying exponentially, just like this virus, over the next years. Each of these crises will again be taking a blow at these fragile industries. And how long are we going to be propping them up before we start, you know, focusing on what a real economy could be, and based upon this. And this is the role of youth, to imagine, really reimagine, you know, like these hotels, not, the goal isn't to get them back functioning as hotels for tourists who fly here for a weekend. The goal is to, can we turn that into public housing? Why could that hotel not be given to at-risk families? Let's really be thinking big, and we need to be selling our, creating a better, telling a better story than the story that's currently being told to the world. Because with the massive uprisings we saw in all across the world in 2019, it's because people are disenchanted with the story that's being told to them. They're being disenchanted with how the future looks to them. And it is the role of youth and all of us in creating this better story, so we can realize how, by dealing with inequality, by dealing with the climate crisis, by dealing with the health crises, we're actually creating a better world that's closer to the world we want, rather than this world that's trying to keep us all so separated.
Thank you. I'm aware of the time, but I will still go into one more question, because we spoke about the health sector, we spoke about the environment, we spoke about the economy, but there is also a question we just received regarding the politics and what is some of the lobbying that is going on behind the scenes, behind the crisis, but then also the restrictions on freedoms that are taking place in some of the countries. And this is not related to the health quarantine, but rather in the terms of extreme or absolute powers that some European leaders are taking. So how can young people still stay engaged within those contexts where the health crisis or the pandemic is being used to actually used for political gains of certain parties and leaders?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Erica. And this is an absolutely crucial question. And this question, you know, this is what we should be talking about with all of our friends and families right now, because at moments of crises like this, something's going to change. And just as I'm saying, this is a great opportunity to fix many of the historical injustices that have been created through centuries of, you know, structural racism and whatnot. Other people are saying now's the moment to consolidate more wealth, to consolidate more power, to do exactly what we wanted. And I think the example from Hungary of Mr. Orban in Hungary managed to get absolute powers approved with no time limits. It's terrifying. And we are going to see people, leaders all over the world. I don't even like calling them leaders. All over the world trying to do power grabs like that. We need to be really on it, and also know that it's a really tough moment to be responding, because we can't flood the streets as we normally do. So we need to be thinking creatively how we are networking with people, sharing, communicating, helping to build the frame that, you know, anyone who thinks, okay, well, this has to happen now, you know, construct that, creating narratives that are showing that, look, this is not the way this has to go. But it's a really difficult question and a really scary one, to be honest. And yeah, and how, so I think we're either going to see, and I mean, all over the world, we're going to see an attempt to reduce our freedoms. So let's be on it, be communicating about that, be loud. Social media campaigns now, are really useful. In Spain, I think, because we had sort of a preemptive campaign around people's shock. It showed that there is some organizing power, and I think that makes it harder to push through some of these massive, bailouts for polluting industries or whatnot. But yeah, no, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that. If you do, please let us know. But it's absolutely crucial that we're watching this and preparing for this, and organizing around this, and knowing that many countries are going to try to make sure that the restrictions on movement and civil liberties that happen now, will stay. Like, okay, people have to try to use it as an excuse to have curfews and whatnot. So as we come out of this, we're going to have to know which new laws we're going to have to be breaking and pushing against, and organizing against, so that we can regain what has been lost in this crisis. Otherwise, it can be lost forever. At the same time that we're looking to gain new ground. Yeah, cool.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Kevin, for your time and for the presentation. And thank you for everybody who joined. As I mentioned already, the recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, and also it is going to stay on our Facebook page. And with Kevin's permission, we will also share the presentation through our website. As a part of Perspectives of Youth, we will be also having other webinars and other articles on some of the questions that Kevin also has raised, and the ones that are coming up will be the webinars on the topic of solidarity, which has also been touched upon in this presentation, but also a related topic as well on digitalization and young people, and how it affects young people's lives, as well as its links with artificial intelligence. So I hope that you will continue following us. Thank you all for joining, and do feel free to continue the discussions and raising questions also through our Facebook page, through the comments there, and also through the YouTube channel. Okay, thank you very much again, Kevin.
Bye-bye, thank you so much.